Okay, so this guy was kind of insane. He was like the one that's the most different from all the other videos I've seen, and it's about passing new regulations.
Reality. It's showtime. So what now? How do you deliver? Well, the first thing to recognize is that the title of this course is a misnomer. It's captioned How to Get Your Policy Through the Agency. But it isn't your policy. It's the president's policy. And this is a material distinction for two reasons. First, it is essential that you surround yourself with people who believe in the president's agenda. This isn't about loyalty. It's about efficacy. People who believe in the agenda will go the extra mile to get it done. In any substantive endeavor, you're going to encounter bureaucratic and legal hurdles. Some expected, others unexpected. If you're dutifully but unenthusiastically carrying out your boss's orders, you'll say, "Sir, we tried, this came up, we can't do it." But if you're passionate about the policy reform, if you're invested in making it happen, if you want to see it done, you'll be undaunted and unrelenting. You'll think creatively about how to get it done, how to clear the hurdles. And that right there is often the difference when it comes to big things between success and failure. That's why it's really important you got to have people who back you. Otherwise, you'll get undermined and you'll be less efficient. Now, the next Republican administration will be the most important one of our lives. There's too much to do, there's no time to lose, and the stakes are too high. The left has used its monopoly over education, media, and culture to crack the pillars of American society. I'm talking about free speech, meritocracy, a national faith, and the unique excellence of our self-governing republic. So in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI as they call it, the Democrats are lowering standards in every
Again, these came out last August, okay?
aspect of modern life, most alarmingly in medicine. They're brainwashing the next generation with the dangerous fiction that America is systemically racist. And their false but pervasive propaganda stokes resentment, fuels chaos in our cities, and robs us of the self-confidence that we have a civilization worth defending.
This is straight up evil brainwashing. This is really hardcore.
I mention this because if the next Republican president does not execute a dramatic course correction, there may never be another chance. So if you're not on board with helping implement a dramatic course correction because you're afraid it'll damage your future employment prospects, it'll harm you socially, look, I get it. That's a real danger. It's a real thing. But please, do us all a favor and sit this one out. We only need to fill 5,000 administration positions, and there are tens of millions of conservative voters to choose from. If you're not prepared to be bold, we can manage without you. Trust me. I used to help run the
Jeez, okay.
Office of Presidential Personnel at the White House. Now that said, if you're watching this video, you're probably precisely the kind of dedicated person we need. So in this next section, I'm going to get into the technical details of how to get big things done. There's a school of thought that when you get into office, your power is at its apex, so you should tackle the hardest thing first. Now, I think that's a big mistake, because the bigger issues tend to be more complicated, and having more surface area, it's easier for your opponents to find ways to bog you down. Instead,
Now listen carefully to this one, because this shows why they got so much done so quickly.
My view is start with some quick victories to build some momentum and signal to everyone that you're a skilled operator who gets things done. So, my advice is that your first target should be the low-hanging fruit of some liberal agency guidance. And there are a mountain of examples of this. It's a target-rich environment. So for example, one of the signature initiatives of the left is DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Now, every agency is going to have documents on their website referring to DEI initiatives, DEI offices, and all of those things can just be taken down immediately on day one. You have similar things at HUD. HUD has a guidance document that says, landlords might be liable for running criminal background checks on prospective tenants.
Of course they'd choose that for an example, right? Hint, hint, Donald.
Because these background checks disproportionately ding minorities. And again, this can be removed without notice or comment. And the examples of these types of things are legion. I'll give you another one. The Department of Education wrote letters to schools saying that disciplining students in the classroom could violate civil rights laws because the discipline could be disproportionately
The fuck? Wait a minute. Where is he going with this?
affecting minorities. As you prepare to start working...
Oh, since beating children at schools is bad because they think that we're going to go harder on the minority kids. Oh yeah, like that's a crazy thought.
Your agency. Just peruse their website.
I'm going to rewind that again. Listen carefully.
Disciplining students in the classroom could violate civil rights laws because the discipline could be disproportionately affecting minorities. As you prepare...
Why would we think that? Let's fast forward to today. Why would we think that any one of you guys have anything against minorities?
Start working your agency. Just peruse their website. Do some research. Figure out what they have up there. What are they talking about? Try to look for some of this DEI stuff, for example. And then consult the Project 2025 policy agenda. Try to figure out which major policy issues are here that maybe agencies have been operating through guidance that could be undone simply through the process I described, without having to do the rulemaking, without having to do notice and comment. And this way you'll know exactly where to hit right early on day one. The DEI agenda example I gave, it's high visibility, but the truth is you need to clear out all the underbrush. All the liberal guidance has to go. Let nothing live. And the reason I say this is that a key element of the liberal strategy has been to gradually but steadily move the law to the left through guidance documents and strategic lawsuits over time. So as you have a statute, but they interpret it in a certain way and no one's kind of looking, and over time they shifted very far away from where it started. And an excellent treatment of this is in Justice Thomas's dissent in a case called Texas Against Inclusive Communities. And in the dissent, he details how activists and their liberal allies at agencies subtly but steadily transformed statutory.
This guy's taking crazy pills. Whatever crazy thing this is a lot of this stuff. I don't know. In my opinion, I think he's aware that he's making some of this up, but he has to exaggerate it for the appointees that are watching this. But this is pretty fucking nuts.
Prohibitions on purposeful discrimination.
As far as like the idea he has of the left or whatever.
Into a ban on policies that just have a disproportionate impact. So in other words, they took things which said basically, you can't discriminate in housing, and said, well, if you run a background check or a credit check, that is also a violation, because even though you had no intent to discriminate against anyone, you're just trying to, not have criminals in your house, that could have a disproportionate impact on some populations. That's very much not what Congress intended when it first came out there. And they essentially they were able to shift it to that through these guidance processes. Now, ultimately, the Supreme Court blessed it, but the point is that it only got to that point because over a period of many years, the bureaucrats in the agency slowly crept toward that. And this disparate impact idea would never have passed Congress, and in fact, it didn't. It was all done by administrative agencies. And these gradual shifts, the way they do them, they're done through guidance documents and policy interpretations. So if you go in there and you tear that stuff down, all that underbrush, you're going to disrupt their whole game because you're eliminating the fundamental documents. You're going to put them back in guidance, try to do it all at once. The reason is it's much harder for the opposition to stymie you when they have to fight a multi-front war. I mean, think about it, right? There's a newspaper article that says, agency eliminated as A and B and C and D and E. Like, how do you focus? Where do you go first? Create confusion, do it all at once, and like I said, because it can be done quickly, you can accomplish.
So that's the reason why they've been firing so many people all at once. I'm going to rewind that. Let's go back into this a little bit.
Guidance, try to do it all at once. The reason is it's much harder for the opposition to stymie you when they have to fight a multi-front war. I mean, think about it, right? There's a newspaper article that says, agency eliminated as A and B and C and D and E. Like, how do you focus? Where do you go first? Create confusion, do it all at once, and like I said, because it can be done quickly, you can accomplish it in one fell swoop.
My God, that's crazy that they put that in the training videos. I mean, there's a whole lot more this guy says, too.
Okay, so you've eliminated all the liberal guidance documents, right? Okay, good. So now that you've done that, turn your attention to grant conditions. Each year, agencies dole out hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayer money in the form of grants. These grants go to organizations, they go to states, they go to corporations, and there's always strings attached.
Oh, because that's a whole lot better than it going to golf and all this other stupid shit. To Bitcoin and all these dumb things.
Now here's the thing. The left is adept and totally unabashed about using grant conditions to implement their radical agenda. And I'm going to give some detailed examples because they're important points of...
There's no radical agenda. I mean, more than half these people even talking in this video got there by the very thing he's talking shit on.
Reference for grant conditions when we want to attach them. So, example 1. The Bipartisan CHIPS Act made available over $50 billion in subsidies to U.S. semiconductor manufacturers. The administration was supposed to use the funding to spark a renaissance in American semiconductor manufacturing, like bring manufacturing back. Instead, the Biden Commerce Department is using it as a vehicle to impose its woke agenda.
Oh yeah, because everything is it's just all sparked and motivated by fucking woke agenda of all things. stupid.
Sections of the 75-page funding notice are devoted to requiring applicants to make all sorts of commitments regarding equity, childcare, fair housing. So look, some job owning is to be expected from liberal administrations, but this is extreme.
Because fuck fair housing and childcare. What the fuck?
So for example, in a bid to boost minority hiring, the funding notice said, I think this is a quote, strongly encourages applicants to eliminate college degree requirements. So you want to hire people, you don't really need a college degree because that could have a disparate impact. The CHIPS Act also requires grantees to make community investments in workforce training and employment opportunities. And the funding notice advises applicants that, quote, ideal investments would be financing or building affordable housing or providing housing vouchers. This is a novel requirement. Nowhere in the CHIPS Act is there any reference to low-income housing, but it's a priority for the left, so they shoehorned it into the CHIPS Act.
Okay, these fucking people complain about homeless people and then they get upset that we do something about it. What the fuck? This guy's insane.
Another example is also from the CHIPS Act, right? As part of the workforce training requirements, the Biden administration is demanding that grantees specify what they call wraparound services. They want them to provide wraparound services. And this is another phrase that's found nowhere in the CHIPS Act. But the department says, what's a wraparound service? It basically means businesses paying for services for workers and employees, services such as adult care, transportation assistance, housing assistance, and emergency cash assistance. All these things have been shoveled into the CHIPS Act grant.
Emergency cash assistance. What is going on here?
The grant, you do this. What's another liberal priority? Free childcare, right? So the department...
He's saying that as if, as if even right now, if I just wanted cash, that I can say it's an emergency and I would get it just that easy. That's not what emergency cash funds mean, you dingus.
In order to get CHIPS Act is requiring firms that want more than $150 million in funding to provide
This guy's probably even used emergency cash funds and he doesn't even know it. He's too stupid to fucking know.
But the department didn't stop there. Even firms that are not seeking $150 million, they're looking for some smaller amount, are, quote, strongly encouraged to provide access to childcare for both the construction workers who build the facility and the employees who work there. And it means nothing that some of these demands are presented as suggestions rather than requirements. The funding notice is very clear. It reminds applicants that the award decision of the department's, quote, grant officers are final and may not be appealed. So the grant applicants know to whom they have to bow. I'm spending time on these CHIPS Act grant details because it's a perfect illustration of how the left uses every lever of power to advance its agenda. If we want to start winning, we need to do the same. No one on our side would ever have thought to connect semiconductor grants to fair housing or cash assistance, right? We need to start making those connections for the things we care about, and we should be equally unapologetic about it. I'll give you another example. The Obama Justice Department required jurisdictions that receive law enforcement grants to conduct trainings on implicit bias, which, as Heather McDonald, who's a tremendous scholar, as she demonstrates in her book Diversity Delusion, is a sort of a fake pseudoscience purporting to prove systemic bias. It's fake because it doesn't even have the basic characteristics of a scientific result, namely on minority health. These are all grants. Another example. In May 2022, a physician scientist lost her NIH funding for a drug trial because the trial population did not contain enough blacks, even though it was a disease that blacks rarely get. Democrats are absolutely...
There is no disease that blacks rarely get. They're not different than that. That turned left real quick. That was a real racist ass thing right there.
Absolutely shameless.
That's false.
About using...
He's basically trying to say... That's him trying to... He's blocking black people from getting the same exact health care as us by saying, oh, they don't get it that much. That's some racist shit. That's some cruel racist shit.
Federal grants to advance their radical agenda. And we will not win unless we do the same. So this grant approach could work for almost any priority. But for purposes of illustration of how we would do it, let's just assume that as a movement, the next Republican president wants to dismantle the DEI agenda root and branch. And let's say you're the staffer in charge of making it happen at each agency. So how do you do it? Well, the first thing you do is stop the bleeding. Day one, no more diversity-based grants made by any agency. What's done is done, but you're now totally out of that business. Well, okay, but how do you find which grants are which? Well, one thing you could do is you could check what they call the NOFAs. When an agency issues a grant, it starts with a Notice of Funding Availability. It's an acronym, NOFA. And that sets forth the grant conditions, the application procedures, and then you also have the final grant agreement between the agency and the recipient. And it'll contain the provisions that govern the funding. So start by scouring those documents for any DEI-based terms so you know which grant programs need in hiring for police forces that receive Justice Department grants, and so on and so forth. And these conditions would be included in the NOFAs and the grant contracts. If pursued unrelentingly, which is exactly what the left would do in our position, it could be used to take down the entire DEI apparatus.
The left isn't this fucking driven about anything. We're not out to get. They're like the left people in the left. They're not like out to get you or anything. That doesn't exist in their fucking minds. This is just crazy.
Across all sectors of the economy. So think about this. Using just federal grant conditions, you would not just halt, but reverse one of the left's most significant initiatives. And this was just but one example. The grant power is immense, and we have to use it to our advantage. So think about what you want to do, and think about how to attach it to a grant condition. That's how the left does so much of their mischief, and that's how we need to get our initiatives. Conditions can be effectuated without going through a more formal rulemaking process, which again, remember, is technically called an informal rulemaking because it's done through notice and comment and not through a hearing procedure. But some changes will require a rule. Another great source of leverage for implementing the president's agenda is by imposing the policy agenda on federal contractors as a condition of working for the government. Now again, the left is absolutely shameless about this. So for example, President Biden ordered federal agencies to include in their contract.
Shameless about what? Dog, no, dog. It ain't like that.
A new clause requiring federal contractors to comply with vaccine mandates. President Obama banned federal contractors from discriminating based on gender identity. And this was all before the Supreme Court had weighed in on these issues. So returning to my DEI example, every agency should prohibit companies that receive federal contracts from engaging in race-based hiring or diversity trainings. They should also be required to hire a meritocracy officer to monitor compliance. Again, this would be tied to the Supreme Court decision and preventing service standards from being lowered. And this wouldn't be limited to just, defense contractors, which is what people normally think of when they think of, agreements with government contractors. Even though the government is brimming with lawyers, for example, it often hires large private law firms to handle certain matters. So you can touch a lot of different people with this. It's not just, when you talk about government contractors, it covers a huge set of private entities.
So this guy basically found a bunch of loopholes for all the racism to let slip through the cracks.
So you've got your guidance, you've got your rules, but as you try to implement the president's agenda, you're going to constantly hear, well, what if we get sued?
Now, keep in mind, this guy's segment was over an hour long. I'm chopping these up as to compact it as much as I can. Okay, here's the juicy part. What if we get sued? Here's his loopholes for not getting sued.
And look, there's something to that. The greatest danger to the conservative agenda is litigation. The left will absolutely run to the courts to stop you. And there's no shortage of activist judges to help them. Just think about that disruption at Stanford, right? There was a sitting federal judge going to speak, and he was shouted down for presenting a conservative viewpoint. And these are the future judges at one of the most elite law schools, and they literally cannot bear to hear the other side. So it's a problem. But past Republican administrations have totally failed to counter this litigation, and its effects have been devastating. Think about the travel ban in the early days of the Trump administration. It was immediately halted. 3 years later or something, the Supreme Court upheld it.
Oh, you mean the Muslim travel ban? Gee, I wonder why that was immediately halted, you dingus.
But then it was too late. The momentum was lost. The policy energy of the administration had already been set. So how do you deal with that? Prior administrations, they'll rail against the activist judges, the unfairness of it all. They'll send out fundraising letters, but no one's devised or implemented any solutions. Ultimately, they just sit there and take it. And we cannot have that. So, here's what we need to do. We need to seek injunction bonds. Basically, when you go into court and you're challenging a rule, what they'll often ask for is an injunction. They want the court to say, you can't do that, and say, look, we have to have a whole trial on it and investigate it further, but at least to start, we're going to temporarily enjoin it. We're going to say the agency can't enforce the law right now because we have to look at it further. And pending further analysis, we're going to block it. That's called an injunction. However, there's something that you normally do when a court issues an injunction that for some reason in litigation like this, they never ever do and the government doesn't bother to ask for. And that is an injunction bond, which means the party seeking the injunction has to actually put money up in escrow, a bond, in case the thing is later overturned. So I'll read you the exact rules. The Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, which govern how litigation proceeds in federal court, and Rule 65C in caption security, says the following. The court may issue a preliminary injunction or a temporary restraining order, which is what I'm talking about here, right? Blocking a rule from being implemented, only if, I'll repeat that, only if the movement, meaning the party seeking it, gives security in an amount that the court considers proper to pay the costs and damages sustained by any party found to have been wrongfully enjoined or restrained. In other words, you want...
There you go. As long as you can buy your way out, if you can pay this amount of money, then you can bond yourself out of these temporary restraining orders. So if you can pay your way out of anything, what a fucking rule that is.
Injunction, you got to put up some money in case after further analysis, the court determines, the agency did have the authority to do it.
And that's why DeLeon over here, DeLeon Musk, is the ultimate fucking muscle, and he knows it too, because they can pay their way out of, God, literally anything.
Think about the Hawaii example. They told Trump he couldn't do it. 3 years later, they told him he could. Well, too late now. Well, if there were an injunction bond, that would really have helped. So these injunction bonds, they're actually designed for sort of two basic functions. One is to deter frivolous litigation, right? Do I really want to bring this case if I'm going to have to put up a couple $1 million? And the second thing is to actually compensate for, injury to a party when it was erroneously enjoined from doing what it wanted to do. And, courts have looked at this. They say, look, the rule is mandatory and unambiguous. It's very clear that they should be seeking injunction bonds.
As far as the justice system goes, how did that make sense that, if they have money to pay for it, then it's justified? Why is that even close to being a fucking thing? Why is that an actual thing? I mean, that makes no sense. Who the fuck made that up?
And yet, it isn't done.
Not made it up, but made it thing.
So when the appellate courts have looked at this, the district courts have looked at this, basically what the left has done, and their sort of fellow traveler judges, is they say, well, in public interest litigation, which is their code word for activists suing to block big policy moves, what they say is, well, you don't need to post an injunction bond, or perhaps you do, but you're posting the bond at 0. So yes, the court is saying that there has to be a bond, but we're setting the bond at 0. So we're not violating the law. The law says you can issue an injunction if you set a bond. We did set a bond, but we set it at 0. Well, what kind of corrupt intellectual nonsense is that? But this is what they do, and we're sort of just sitting there and taking it. So if we were to insist upon injunction bonds, it would be extremely effective. There was a law review article I read from the 1980s. I'm not that old. I just read the article from that. And it was just...
It's kind of interesting that he just added that. And why... I wonder why he distanced himself from that.
Discussing that it's usually quite difficult for public interest litigants to fulfill bond requirements. So
that seems like such a bizarre thing to go off topic with, right? I'm not that old, I just heard about it.
The point of this article was, gosh, we really shouldn't require these people to have to post bond, because if we did, it would stop all this public interest litigation. Well, imagine how valuable that is. It's this litigation which has been killing us in area after area after area, and if we could stop that by requiring them to post bond, it would be fantastic. All this liberal litigation would grind to a halt, and yet Republican Justice Departments don't seek them. I asked about this when I was at the White House, and I was, well, it's hard to value what the cost would be to us, so we don't even seek it. What are you talking about? We have an army of economists in the government who can estimate the costs of regulations. They can also estimate the cost of delaying things. They can be a little creative about it. So this is really important. Insist that in any policy litigation, your agency demands an injunction bond. And if the bond is denied, you can appeal it. A lot of times you can't appeal what they call interlocutory orders, things that happen during the trial until it's over. But this is appealable. You don't have to wait till the end of the litigation to appeal the denial of an injunction bond.
If we had somebody on our side that's equivalent to this guy, holy cow, now that would be quite a fight, right? This guy's nuts. I mean, that's as much as I can take for today, but I'll put the link down in the description if you guys are interested. This guy talks like this for literally, it's not well over an hour. I think it's just a few minutes past an hour, but might even be over an hour now that I think of it. I don't know, but it's long. It's really long. But yeah, these videos are fucking nuts, and it's different watching them today than when I first watched them back in October, obviously, because things are happening now. But I can't even remember exactly what I was thinking when I saw these back in October. What a trip. These people are fucking nuts, but this is what we're dealing with. A lot of the other ones are just older guys being boring, and what they're doing, what I've noticed that they're doing, is they are stating how things work and who does this and what exactly does the president have say over. But I noticed that some of the things, I mean, all of it are all of it's true. There are all of these things in the Constitution, all the ways that they how the White House works and everything. But I noticed that they just change things up in certain parts, just the slightest bit. But it's just enough to make a difference. And just to double check, my thoughts, I put them through ChatGPT. I just said, hey, is this true or false? And I put my phone next to the TV and I let it record all the words. And then ChatGPT went through every single thing and said, this is correct, this one, and then it goes through and describes like this one's a little bit, and then it says this one's a little off, and this is why it's a little off, and it's not 100% correct, and then it states what would be the correct way to say it, but it's just barely. I noticed that most of the things that they've been saying is 100% true, 100% true, and it's like one or two things are a little, just slightly off, and I'm like, that's kind of interesting. Okay. But yeah, go check them out yourself, and that's it for now.